The airport was packed, a chaotic blend of weary travelers crying children, and the ever-present hum of airport announcements crackling over the loudspeakers. Dr. Victoria Monroe adjusted the strap of her designer tote bag and sighed as she stood in the long security line, glancing at her watch. She had always hated commercial flights, but with her new position requiring a discreet arrival, taking a private jet was out of the question. This was her first trip as the newly elected governor of Georgia, and she wanted no special treatment, at least not yet. Victoria, a striking black woman in her early 40s, carried herself with effortless grace. Her tailored navy blue suit hugged her figure in all the right places, and her natural curls were swept into a sleek bun. Despite her polished appearance, she was exhausted. The campaign had been grueling, and the victory had come at a cost. Death threats, racial slurs, and an overwhelming burden of expectation. But she had won. She had made history. She just wished she could get through this damn airport without incident. But of course, that was never an option. "Ma'am, step to the side," a TSA agent barked, eyeing her with a scrutinizing glare. Victoria sighed but complied, stepping out of line as the agent, a middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a badge that read, Officer J. Calloway, narrowed his eyes at her. "Spread your arms," he ordered, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. Victoria complied, biting the inside of her cheek as he patted her down with far more force than necessary. It wasn't her first time dealing with this. It probably wouldn't be the last. "What's in the bag?" he asked, nodding toward her tote. "Be the last." "What's in the bag?" he asked, nodding toward her tote. "Just my laptop and some documents," she replied, keeping her voice even. "Yeah, you mind if I take a look?" "Not at all," she said, even though she very much did mind. He unzipped the bag with deliberate slowness, rifling through her things. She said, even though she very much did mind. He unzipped the bag with deliberate slowness, rifling through her things like he expected to find something incriminating. When he pulled out her planner, a silver pen clipped to the cover, his expression twisted into a sneer. "You some kind of big shot or something," he muttered. Victoria forced a smile. "Just a public servant, sir," he scoffed, tossing the planner back into the bag before waving her off with a dismissive flick of his hand. "Move along." Victoria exhaled sharply and grabbed her bag, resisting the urge to say something. It wasn't worth it. Not here, not now. By the time she reached her gate, she was desperate for a moment to herself. She settled into her seat and pulled out her phone, scanning emails while waiting for the boarding call. She didn't notice the man approaching until it was too late. "Figures," a voice drawled. She looked up and immediately recognized him, Officer Ethan Calloway. He was out of uniform now, dressed in jeans and a Blue Lives Matter t-shirt, his face set in an expression of smug disdain. "You again," Victoria said coolly. "You people always act like you're so important," Calloway sneered, dropping into the seat next to her. "Flying first class, dressing like you're somebody. But we both know what you really are." Victoria turned fully to face him now, her expression unreadable. "And what exactly do you think I am?" Calloway leaned in, his beer-laden breath washing over her, a nobody. Victoria felt her nails dig into her palm, but she didn't flinch. She had been through worse. The overhead speaker crackled. First-class passengers now boarding. Victoria stood smoothly adjusting her bag. "Excuse me." Calloway snorted, standing as well. "Looks like we're seat mates. Ain't that something?" Victoria sighed inwardly. Of course he was in first class. Men like him always found a way to push themselves into spaces they believed belonged only to them. She boarded ahead of him, sinking into her plush window seat and trying to ignore the way her hands trembled with frustration. This was just a flight, a few hours. She could handle it. But as Calloway took the seat beside her, a smug grin still plastered on his face, she knew. This flight was going to be hell. Victoria exhaled slowly, pressing her back against the soft leather of her first-class seat. The hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin as passengers filed in, placing their bags in the overhead bins and settling into their seats. She adjusted the gold watch on her wrist, forcing herself to focus on the rhythmic ticking instead of the obnoxious presence beside her. Calloway, now seated comfortably, stretched his legs out like he owned the space. His boots, scuffed and worn, nudged against Victoria's pristine leather flats. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, he smirked. "You know, I bet you don't even belong up here," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear, but low enough to feign innocence. Victoria clenched her jaw. She had spent years fighting battles against men like him, men who underestimated her, who dismissed her intelligence, who saw her skin before they saw her humanity. She wasn't about to let this ignorant fool ruin her flight. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You seem obsessed with where I belong," she said calmly. "Why is that?" Calloway let out a dry chuckle. "I just find it funny. That's all. You people always crying about discrimination. But look at you, sitting up here in first class like you earned it." Victoria's fingers curled into fists. She could feel the eyes of a few nearby passengers glancing their way, sensing the growing tension. Before she could respond, a flight attendant approached, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. "Would either of you like a drink before takeoff?" she asked with a professional smile. "I'll take a whiskey." "Neat," Calloway said, not even glancing at her. The flight attendant nodded, then turned to Victoria. "And for you, ma'am?" Victoria gave her a polite smile. "Just water. Thank you." As the flight attendant walked away, Calloway let out a polite smile. "Just water. Thank you." As the flight attendant walked away, Calloway let out a short laugh. "Water?" Figures Victoria arched an eyebrow. "And what exactly does that mean?" Calloway shrugged, taking off his baseball cap and running a hand through his thinning hair. "It means you people are always trying to act all high and mighty, always trying to prove something." Victoria took a deep breath, reminding herself that dignity was her greatest weapon. She had dealt with worse. This man was nothing more than an inconvenience. The flight attendant returned with their drinks, setting Calloway whiskey down first. He grabbed the glass, swirling the amber liquid before taking a slow sip. When Victoria's water was placed in front of her, she whispered a quiet, "Thank you," and reached for it. Calloway suddenly scoffed, shaking his head. "It's funny, really. No matter how much you dress up, no matter how much money you throw around, you'll never really be one of us." Victoria's grip on the glass tightened, her patience wearing thin. "One of you," she echoed. "You mean ignorant, small-minded, trapped in a past that no longer exists?" Calloway's expression darkened. His fingers curled around the armrest between them, his knuckles whitening. "Watch your mouth." Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying him. He was used to power, used to control, and he despised the idea of a black woman challenging him in any capacity. "I think I'll say whatever I please," she replied coolly. Calloway's eyes narrowed, but before he could say anything else, the pilot's voice, "I think I'll say whatever I please," she replied coolly. Calloway's eyes narrowed, but before he could say anything else, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're expecting a smooth flight to Atlanta with a few areas of light turbulence along the way. We should be touching down in approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened as we prepare for takeoff." Victoria secured her seatbelt and turned her gaze toward the window, watching as the plane slowly backed away from the gate. She could feel Calloway fuming beside her, his frustration palpable. The plane began to accelerate down the runway, the force pressing her into the seat as it lifted off the ground. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes, hoping the altitude would bring some distance between her and the ugliness beside her. But Calloway wasn't done. As the seatbelt sign blinked off, he shifted, leaning closer. "You ever been put in your place before?" Victoria's eyes snapped open. She turned to face him fully, her voice unwavering. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Calloway muttered, taking another sip of his whiskey. "Women like you always thinking you can talk back, act all superior. But I bet deep down, you know where you really stand." Victoria stared at him for a long moment. "Just know where you really stand." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, disgust curling in her stomach. This was a man who had likely spent his whole life pushing people down, feeding off the belief that he was above others. He was the type of man who would smile in a black woman's face in public and spit on the ground where she walked the moment she turned her back. She had met men like him before, and she had destroyed men like him before. "You must be a very insecure man," she said finally, her voice even. Calloway's nostrils flared. "What the hell did you just say?" "I said, you must be insecure." Victoria leaned in slightly, dropping her voice just enough to make it sting. "You've been sitting here, desperate to get a reaction out of me. Why is that? What is it about me that threatens you so much?" His fingers twitched, his jaw clenched, and then his lips curled into a sneer. And before Victoria could react, he spat. A warm, wet glob landed on her cheek. Victoria froze. The world seemed to slow. A few passengers gasped. Someone let out a muffled, horrified, "Oh my God." Calloway sat back, smug and satisfied, like he had just won some twisted game. "Yes, I just don't like your kind taking up space where you don't belong." Victoria slowly reached for a napkin, her hands surprisingly steady. She wiped the saliva off her face with a calculated calm, never breaking eye contact with him. The flight attendant, who had been coming down the aisle, stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, glancing between Victoria and Calloway. A tense silence filled the cabin. Victoria's voice, when she finally spoke, was chillingly composed. "You're going to regret that." Calloway let out an ugly chuckle. "Yeah, and what exactly are you going to do about it?" Victoria didn't answer. She didn't need to, because soon enough, the entire plane would know exactly who she was. The plane cabin fell into a heavy silence, the kind that felt suffocating. Eyes darted between Victoria and Calloway, passengers unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't witnessed what had just happened. But there was no ignoring it. The spit had landed, and the insult had been delivered. Victoria sat still, her fingers gripping the napkin she had used to wipe her cheek. Her heartbeat was steady, controlled. She had spent years learning to master herself in moments like this. Anger was easy, revenge was easier, but power came from patience. Calloway smirked, stretching his legs out again, as if he had just finished some grand performance. "Kick out your tongue," he muttered, swirling the last of his whiskey in his glass. "Thought you had a lot to say before." Victoria exhaled through her nose, pressing her tongue against the back of her teeth. This man wanted a reaction. He wanted her to explode, to yell, to prove whatever twisted point he had built in his head about women like her. He wasn't going to get that satisfaction, but that didn't mean he'd get away with it. The flight attendant, a young woman with auburn hair, finally found her voice. "Sir, I need you to step away from this passenger immediately." Her voice was strong, but there was an underlying tremor in it. She had probably never dealt with something like this before. Calloway scoffed. "Step away. I'm already in my damn seat." The flight attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir, spitting on another passenger is unacceptable behavior. I need you to remain calm, or I'll be forced to escalate this matter to the pilot." Calloway laughed, shaking his head. "Please, and what's the pilot gonna do? Turn the whole damn plane around?" Victoria saw the way the flight attendant's fingers twitched, gripping the back of a seat for support. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and clearly unsure how to handle a situation spiraling this fast. Victoria set her napkin down, adjusted her watch, and finally turned to look at Calloway properly. "You should listen to her," she said, voice smooth as glass. Calloway rolled his eyes. "Or what?" Victoria leaned in just slightly. "Or what?" Victoria leaned in just slightly. "Or you're going to find out exactly why this was the worst mistake of your life." Something about the way she said it, calm, certain, made Calloway pause for half a second. But then he scoffed, shaking his head. "Big talk." The flight attendant cleared her throat. Made Calloway pause for half a second. But then he scoffed, shaking his head. "Big talk." The flight attendant cleared her throat. "Sir, I'm issuing a final warning. If you continue to be disruptive, you will be detained upon landing." Calloway sighed dramatically and threw his hands up. "Fine Jesus, everyone's so sensitive these days." He shifted in his seat, rolling his neck. "I'll sit here and enjoy my flight. That good enough for you?" The flight attendant hesitated, then gave Victoria an apologetic glance before stepping back. It was clear she wanted to do more, but wasn't sure what her authority allowed. Victoria offered her a small reassuring nod. The battle wasn't over. It had barely begun. The minutes ticked by, and the tension remained thick in the air. Victoria could feel Calloway gaze on her, his energy shifting from smug amusement to something darker. He wasn't done trying to get under her skin. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, causing the cabin to jolt slightly. Victoria took the opportunity to stretch her arms, tilting her head just enough to glance behind her. A few passengers were still watching, eyes wary, others whispering among themselves. She made a mental note of those who looked particularly invested, witnesses. Calloway, meanwhile, was busy flagging down another flight attendant. "Hey, another whiskey over here." The male attendant, older with graying hair, approached cautiously. "Sir, we have a policy on limiting alcohol consumption for disruptive passengers." Calloway let out a harsh laugh. "Disruptive? I was minding my damn business before everyone decided to lose their minds over nothing." The attendant didn't budge. "No more whiskey." Calloway muttered something under his breath, but didn't argue further. Instead, he turned back toward Victoria with a slow, knowing smile. "You really think you're better than me, don't you?" Victoria didn't take the bait. Instead, she calmly pulled out her phone and tapped on the screen. Calloway frowned. "What, you recording me now? Gonna play the victim?" Victoria smirked. "I don't need to play anything." She tapped again, her expression unreadable. Calloway squinted, trying to see what she was doing. But before he could ask, the captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today. We are currently cruising at 35,000 feet, with clear skies ahead. As a reminder, disruptive behavior will not be tolerated, and any incidents will be handled accordingly upon landing." The last sentence was deliberate. Victoria knew it, and judging by the way Calloway shifted in his seat, he knew it too. Victoria settled back, a slow smile tugging at her lips. "You really should have thought this through," Calloway scoffed. "Oh, please. What? You think you're going to get me arrested? I have friends in high places, sweetheart." Victoria arched a brow. "Friends?" Calloway smirked. "Yeah, ever heard of the Atlanta PD?" Victoria's expression didn't change, but internally she filed away that little piece of information. Calloway grinned, mistaking her silence for intimidation. "That's right, I'm an officer. Have been for 20 years. You think some little airline rule is gonna do anything to me?" Victoria's stomach turned, but not with fear, with something sharper. She smiled slowly. "An officer. That explains a lot." Calloway chuckled, leaning back like he had won something. "Damn right it does." Victoria held his gaze, her mind already working ahead. The pieces were moving, and he had no idea he had just sealed his own fate. The flight continued, but the energy had shifted. And he had no idea he had just sealed his own fate. The flight continued, but the energy had shifted. Passengers were whispering, flight attendants were tense, and Calloway, for all his bravado, was drinking his water a little too quickly, his eyes flicking toward Victoria now and then. Victoria simply waited because soon, very soon, he was going to realize exactly who he had messed with. And when he did, she wanted to see the look on his face. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, but the tension between Victoria and Calloway remained thick, an electric charge in the air that no one could ignore. Passengers who had initially tried to keep to themselves were now stealing glances, their curiosity outweighing their discomfort. Calloway, oblivious to the shift around him, tapped his fingers against the armrest impatiently. He still had that smug expression, the look of a man who believed himself around him. Tapped his fingers against the armrest impatiently. He still had that smug expression, the look of a man who believed himself untouchable. Victoria, however, was in no rush. She let silence work in her favor, watching as Calloway grew more restless with each passing minute. He checked his watch, sighed dramatically, and shifted in his seat. "You keep looking at me like you've got something to say," Calloway muttered, his voice just loud enough for Victoria to hear. Victoria turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "Not at all. I just enjoy watching people realize they've made a mistake." Calloway chuckled dryly. "Lady, you don't scare me." Victoria smiled, but there was no humor in it. "That's the thing," she said softly. "I don't need to." Calloway shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening around his empty whiskey glass. He wanted another drink, but after his little outburst earlier, the flight attendants had made it clear that wasn't happening. A chime sounded overhead, and the flight attendant from earlier, her name tag reading. Emily Carter walked briskly down the aisle. She was carrying a clipboard and had a tense expression, her eyes scanning the rows before landing on Calloway. "Sir," she said, her voice firm but professional. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Calloway sighed, tilting his head back dramatically. "Jesus, what now?" Emily Carter didn't waver. "You need to come with me to the front of the plane." Victoria watched as Calloway narrowed his eyes. "For what?" Emily Carter didn't flinch. "The captain has been called. I'm going to go and see what's going on." Victoria watched as Calloway narrowed his eyes. "For what?" Emily Carter didn't flinch. "The captain has been informed of the incident, and we need to discuss what happens next." Calloway let out a low laugh. "What happens next? You think I'm about to sit through some lecture about being nice to people?" Emily Carter remained professional. "Sir, refusing to comply with the flight crew can result in legal consequences. I highly suggest you step forward." Calloway huffed but finally stood, rolling his eyes as he stepped into the aisle. As he moved past Victoria, he muttered, "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" Victoria tilted her head. "I enjoy accountability." Calloway didn't respond. Instead, he followed Emily Carter toward the front, his heavy footsteps echoing through the cabin. Passengers whispered among themselves, and Victoria could feel their eyes on her. Some looked approving, others wary. But no one was indifferent. A few moments later, another chime sounded. The intercom crackled to life, and the captain's voice came through, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we want to remind you that all passengers are expected to follow the airline's code of conduct. Any disruptive behavior will be addressed accordingly, and further incidents may result in law enforcement intervention upon landing." It was a warning clear as day, and it was directed at only one person. Victoria leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly. This wasn't over, not yet. About 10 minutes later, Calloway returned. His face was red with frustration, his jaw clenched tight. He didn't look at Victoria as he dropped into his seat, but his energy was tense, coiled. Victoria didn't acknowledge him. She didn't need to. The rest of the flight was quiet, at least on the surface, but the weight of what had happened lingered. As the plane finally began its descent, the pilot's voice came over the speaker once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Welcome to Atlanta. Atlanta home." Victoria glanced at her phone. There were already a few unread messages waiting for her. Her security detail would be ready the moment she stepped off the plane, and Calloway, his day was about to get a lot worse. The wheels touched the ground, and the usual routine began. Passengers unbuckled their seat belts, reaching for overhead compartments, stretching after the long flight. Calloway was quick to grab his bag, shoving past people in his hurry to disembark. He wanted out fast, but Victoria wasn't in a rush. She took her time gathering her things, watching as Calloway stormed down the aisle. He didn't know, not yet, but he would, and she couldn't wait to see it. The plane taxied toward the gate, the mechanical hum of the engines vibrating daintily at the passengers' feet. The moment the seatbelt sign flickered off, the cabin burst into controlled chaos. Seatbelts clicked open, overhead bins slammed, and people jostled to retrieve their bags. Victoria remained seated, calm and composed. She watched Calloway, who was now aggressively shouldering his way toward the front. His thick fingers gripped the strap of his carry-on, knuckles white from the tension in his hands. He wanted off that plane now. Emily Carter, the flight attendant, stood near the front, her lips pursed as she observed the passengers disembarking. When Calloway reached her, she gave him a tight-lipped smile. "Have a good day, sir." It was polite, but her tone held a layer of ice daintily it. Calloway scoffed. "Yes, sure." He stomped past her and out the jet bridge. Victoria exhaled, finally standing. She stretched slightly, rolling her shoulders before retrieving her leather bag from under the seat. She wasn't in a rush. Let the man run ahead. His time was coming. As she moved down the aisle, a few passengers nodded at her, some with looks of silent respect, others with barely concealed curiosity. They had all witnessed the moment in the air. Some likely wanted to say something, but no one did. As Victoria reached the exit, Emily Carter touched her arm gently. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say, I admire how you handled that." Victoria smiled warmly. "Thank you. And you did your job well." Emily Carter looked relieved. "Safe travels." Victoria stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, the cool air-conditioned walkway a stark contrast to the humid air of Atlanta creeping in from the terminal. She moved with purpose, not fast, but steady. She wasn't going to rush through this moment. By the time she entered the terminal, the usual airport hustle surrounded her. Announcements crackling over the PA system, people hurrying to their gates, families reuniting with embraces and laughter. But Victoria wasn't focused on any of that. She spotted Calloway immediately. He was standing near the baggage claim area, scowling at his phone. His fingers moved furiously over the screen, likely sending an angry message to someone about the ridiculous flight attendants and how unfairly he had been treated. Victoria smirked to herself. Calloway still had no idea. Then she saw her team. A group of 6 men and women in dark suits stood near the exit doors, their presence unmistakable. Their earpieces, sharp postures, and keen scanning of the room made it clear who they were. Security detail. Her security detail. One of them, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, spotted her and immediately stepped forward, speaking into his mic. "She's here." Calloway still wasn't looking. Victoria walked past him, her heels clicking against the polished floor, every step deliberate. Calloway only noticed something was off when he saw people moving out of the way. His head snapped up. He saw the men in suits, the sharp professional movements of security, clearing a path. Then his eyes landed on Victoria, his brows furrowed. Victoria didn't break stride. She didn't need to. She passed him without so much as a glance. But the weight of the moment hit Calloway all at once. The realization clawed at his mind, confusion twisting into disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, a question forming, but no words came out. Then the final blow landed. A young journalist, standing just outside the security perimeter, held up a camera. "Governor Monroe," he called out, his voice eager. "Welcome back to Atlanta." Victoria did stop then. She turned, meeting the reporter's gaze with a measured smile. "Thank you," she said smoothly. "It's good to be home." The moment hung in the air like a thunderclap. Calloway stared at her, his mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The new governor of Georgia, the black woman he had spat on, the woman he had dismissed, insulted, and treated like nothing more than an inconvenience. Victoria let the silence stretch, watching as realization crushed him under its weight. Then she turned and walked away. She didn't need to say anything else. She had already won. Calloway felt the ground beneath him shift, his stomach twisting in ways that had nothing to do with turbulence. Governor. His brain struggled to process what had just happened, as if reality had somehow rewired itself in an instant. The woman he had spit on, insulted, and dismissed, she was the governor of Georgia. His breathing became shallow. This wasn't possible. This had to be a mistake. But it wasn't. People were whispering now. A few turned their heads, glancing at him, their expressions unreadable. Someone nearby had definitely seen what happened on the plane. Maybe multiple people. The unease creeping up his spine told him that this was no longer a moment he could shove into the past. He swallowed hard, eyes darting back to where she had been just moments ago. Eva Monroe was already moving through the terminal, flanked by her security detail. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had just assaulted the highest-ranking official in the state, and he had done it in front of dozens of witnesses. His career, his reputation, his entire life gone. Panic crawled through his chest, his instincts kicking in. He needed to get out of here. Now he grabbed his bag off the carousel, gripping the handle so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every movement felt mechanical, his brain running on autopilot. Get to the exit. Get to your car. Get the hell out of here. But as he took a step forward, a voice called his name. Officer Calloway. His spine stiffened. The voice wasn't hostile, but it carried the weight of authority. He turned slowly, heart hammering against his ribs. A man in a dark suit stood a few feet away. His badge was visible on his belt, FBI. Next to him stood another man, his stance equally firm. Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Behind them, two uniformed airport officers hovered nearby, waiting. The FBI agent spoke first. "We need to have a word." Calloway's mouth went dry. This couldn't be happening. He forced a stiff, forced chuckle. "What's this about?" The GBI agent raised an eyebrow. "I think you already know." Calloway's palms grew clammy. He glanced around, trying to gauge how many people were watching. "Too many. Let's not do this here," he muttered, attempting to sound in control. The FBI agent didn't budge. "That's up to you. But either way, we're having this conversation." Calloway's jaw clenched. He could feel the heat of stares pressing down on him, the weight of whispered conversations just out of earshot. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. He took a slow breath, straightening his shoulders in an attempt to reclaim some dignity. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Lead the way." The agents exchanged a glance before gesturing for him to walk ahead. The two uniformed officers subtly adjusted their positioning, ensuring he wasn't going anywhere. Calloway forced himself to move, every step feeling heavier than the last. The corridor they led him down was quieter, away from the prying eyes of the terminal. They stopped near a set of doors marked airport security personnel only. The FBI agent gestured toward them. "Inside." Calloway hesitated. "Am I under arrest?" The GBI agent smirked. "Not yet. The unspoken, but you will be hung in the air." Calloway stepped inside. The room was small, just a plain table for chairs and a camera mounted in the corner. A classic interrogation room. His gut twisted. The agents took their seats across from him, their expressions unreadable. Calloway swallowed again, his mind racing for an escape, an explanation, an excuse. He had to salvage this. He had to control the narrative. The FBI agent folded his hands. "Do you understand the gravity of the situation you're in?" Calloway forced himself to keep a neutral expression. "Look, there's been some misunderstanding. That woman, the governor," the GBI agent corrected, his voice sharp. Calloway's nostrils flared, but he bit down his frustration. He needed to play this carefully. "I didn't know who she was," he said. "It wasn't about her. It was about the way she was acting on the plane. She was being careful," the FBI agent warned, his gaze sharp. Calloway shut his mouth. They weren't buying it. They weren't going to buy it. The GBI agent leaned forward slightly. "Here's the problem, Officer Calloway. You were already on thin ice." Calloway's pulse spiked. "Excuse me?" The agent tilted his head. "You think this is your first complaint?" A sinking feeling settled in Calloway's gut. The FBI agent pulled out a file and slid it across the table. "Your history's not exactly clean." Calloway's fingers twitched, but he didn't reach for it. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what was in that file. Complaints, reports, incidents that had been buried, ignored, or brushed aside. But this one was too big to disappear. Calloway clenched his fists under the table. "I want a lawyer." The FBI agent smiled thinly. "That's a good idea." The GBI agent stood up. "We'll be in touch, Officer Calloway. Enjoy the rest of your day, while you still can." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Calloway didn't move, didn't breathe. He had spent years thinking he was untouchable. But this time there was no escaping the consequences. Calloway sat alone in the stark interrogation room, his heartbeat thudding against his ribs like a war drum. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed, casting harsh shadows on the cold walls. His mind raced, calculating, scheming, grasping for an escape route. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He had spent years enforcing the law, daniel-ing it when necessary, making sure things always went in his favor. He had power, authority, control. But now, he was the one sitting under the microscope. His breath came in shallow bursts as he stared at the closed door, waiting. He needed to act fast before this situation spiraled beyond repair. He had a few cards left to play, maybe. A knock sounded against the metal door, and it swung open. A different man entered this time, a sharply dressed lawyer, his lawyer. Calloway exhaled, relieved. "Daniel," he greeted, his voice carefully measured. Daniel Harper, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state, set his briefcase down and fixed Calloway with a calculating stare. "Tell me exactly what happened." Calloway hesitated. "It's not as bad as they're making it seem." Daniel raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't downplay this. You're facing potential assault charges against a sitting governor. Do you have any idea how deep of a hole you're in?" Calloway swallowed. "I didn't know who she was." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That doesn't matter." He opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder. "The news is already running with it. Multiple passengers saw the whole thing, and the security footage from the plane doesn't help your case." Calloway stiffened. "Security footage?" Daniel slid a tablet across the table and pressed play. The screen flickered to life. There he was in crystal-clear resolution, his sneering face twisted in anger as he spat at Victoria Monroe. The footage showed everything: his aggression, his arrogance, the way she didn't even flinch when he tried to intimidate her. The damning part: Victoria's calm, composed expression while he raged at her. She never raised her voice, never lost her cool. She let him bury himself. Calloway clenched his jaw. This is taken out of context. Daniel didn't even blink. Context won't matter when this goes to trial. A cold shiver crawled up Calloway's spine. "Trial?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "The governor isn't pressing charges yet, but the DA is already looking into it. Public pressure is mounting. They need to make an example out of someone." Calloway shot forward in his chair. "She's setting me up." Daniel gave him a flat look. "No, Calloway. You did this to yourself." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Calloway had always been able to wiggle out of bad situations, using his badge as a shield. But here, there was no badge big enough to protect him. Daniel leaned in. "Here's the deal. I can try to get ahead of this, spin a PR strategy. But if this goes to court, you're facing charges that could end your career, if not your freedom." Calloway clenched his fists. This wasn't over. He had one last move. Leaning in, he lowered his voice. "What if I have something on her?" Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Calloway forced a smirk. "No one climbs that high without skeletons. I've got people I can dig." Daniel's expression turned icy. "Don't be stupid, Calloway. This isn't some small-time case where you can intimidate a witness or make a file disappear. She's the governor. You pull a stunt like that, and the FBI will rip your life apart." Calloway leaned back, lips curling into a sneer. "Then what the hell am I supposed to do, beg?" Daniel sighed. "I need you to listen very carefully. You apologize. You make a public statement. Say it was a misunderstanding. You were exhausted from the flight. You lost your temper. You grovel, and maybe, just maybe, you come out of this with your pension intact." Calloway's stomach twisted. "Grovel? Just maybe you come out of this with your pension intact." Calloway's stomach twisted. Grovel? He had spent years making others Daniel to him. The thought of apologizing publicly made his blood boil. "I won't do it." Daniel's expression darkened. "Then you'll burn." A sharp knock interrupted them. The door swung open again. This time, the FBI agent from earlier stepped inside, a grim expression on his face. "We've got a problem," he said, looking directly at Calloway. Daniel stood. "My client isn't answering any more questions." The agent ignored him and placed a sealed folder on the table. "This is bigger than what happened on the plane." Calloway frowned. "What the hell are you talking about?" The agent flipped open the file revealing pages of bank transactions, signed documents, and internal police records. Calloway's breath caught. They had everything. The FBI agent's voice was calm, but lethal. "We've been investigating you for months. Corruption, cover-ups, intimidation tactics, the incident on the plane. That was just the final nail in your coffin." Calloway's vision blurred. His fingers twitched, but there was nowhere to run. Daniel paled. "You're saying?" The agent nodded. "We have enough to indict." Calloway's world imploded. Everything: his career, his reputation, his future, gone in an instant. His mouth went dry as he tried to formulate a response, but there was nothing to say. The FBI agent closed the folder. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Silence strangled the room. Calloway, hands trembled under the table. His mind screamed for a way out. But there was no escaping this. No way to undo what had been done. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in his life, Calloway was truly powerless.